Hello and welcome back to Debit Credit Done, the podcast that breaks down accounting one concept at a time. I'm Dean, and in today's episode we're moving on to a key checkpoint in the accounting cycle, the trial balance. So in episode 5, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at how journal entries are posted into ledger accounts using the concept of T accounts. And today we're going to pull all that information together into one place to see if everything balances. So the trial balance, it's like a financial health check. If it balances, you can move forward into the preparation of financial statements. If it doesn't balance, well, then it's time to get the calculator out and start investigating what errors have been made. So what exactly is a trial balance? Well, a trial balance is a list of all the balances in the ledger accounts at a specific point in time. So it includes the debit and credit sides, and it's used to check that the total of all debit balances equals the total of all credit balances. Now, it's important to say it is not a report for external use. So it's not like your statement of profit or loss or your statement of financial position, which form part of your financial statements. Instead, what it is an internal tool to make sure that your accounts have been recorded correctly, i.e. that your double entry has been done in line with double entry principles. Now, if a trial balance doesn't balance, it means that there's an error, one or more, in the double entry process, which is not good. However, if it does balance, which is obviously what we do want, and what we want, we want a balanced trial balance, it tells us that at least arithmetically, bookkeeping is arithmetically sound. Yeah, so arithmetically, it's correct. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that the debits and credits are in the right place. It just means that debits do equal credits. So let's have a look then at how we can build a trial balance step by step. So the very first thing you need to do then is go to each one of your ledger accounts and balance that ledger account. Now we've covered that in previous episodes, but essentially if there's more on the debit side, the account's got a debit balance. If there's more on the credit side, it's got a credit balance. What you then do is once you've balanced all your ledger accounts, you list those balances in 2 columns. Debits on the left, credits on the right. Yeah? So, a very simple example, let's say we've got, from our ledgers, we've got a bank with a debit balance of £2,000, a rent expense account with a debit balance of £500, and then a capital account with a credit balance of £2,500. So I'm going to put on the screen just what your trial balance would look like in that situation. So hopefully you can all see that and see that we've got both the debit and credit columns both match, and that means that in terms of double entry, the accounts are balanced and we have a balanced trial balance. So what does a trial balance actually tell you then? So the trial balance just confirms, as we've mentioned previously, that total debits equal total credits. Now, obviously that's massively important because within double entry bookkeeping, every single debit must have a matching credit and every credit must have a matching debit. However, as I mentioned, sort of alluded to a little bit earlier, just because it balanced does not necessarily mean it's right. So a trial balance cannot catch all errors. Yeah? All it does is it confirms that debits equal credits. So let's suppose that you posted the debits and credits to the wrong accounts. So instead of posting your debit to the rent account, you posted it to electricity. Yeah. Well, it's still going to balance, but it's wrong. Yeah. What happens if you miss out a transaction completely? So, got an invoice from a supplier for purchase of, I don't know, let's say some staples. Yeah. So you've got some office equipment cost, yeah, office stationery cost, and you just forgot to post the invoice altogether. Yeah. Well, if it's not in the accounts, you've got no debit and credit. So your debits and credits will still balance, won't they, on the trial balance? But you're just missing an entire transaction. Again, it's wrong, but your trial balance will balance. What happens if you do what I've seen lots of junior staff do over the years? Yeah, you post the transaction the wrong way round. So instead of debiting the account, you credit it, and instead of crediting the other side, you debit it. So you just got your debits and credits the wrong way round. Well, you've still got debit, you've still got credit, and they're still the same amount, so it still balances. But again, it's not correct, is it? Yeah, so just because your trial balance balances doesn't mean that everything's perfect. Yeah, so the trial balance is a great starting point. Yeah, because it almost guarantees that arithmetically it's correct, i.e., debits do equal credits, but it's not a guarantee that the books are completely accurate. Just use it as a check point, not a guarantee. So, what are some of the common mistakes then that we see, as lecturers of AAT? What are some of the common mistakes that certainly I've seen, and lots of other people will have seen students make when they prepare trial balances? Well, first thing is forgetting to bring down the balance from the ledger accounts. So they balance the account, yeah, but use the wrong figures, carry the wrong figures into trial balance. Yeah, that's one thing we see. Placing the balance in the wrong column. So ultimately, if you've got a credit balance in your ledger account, put it on the credit side, yeah, in your trial balance. Don't suddenly start being clever and put it on the other side, yeah? So placing the balances in the right place, yeah? Now, dead click principles are massively useful there. So if you've got an expense account, yeah, you're expecting that expense account to have a debit balance, yeah? So if for some strange reason it ends up as a credit balance on your trial balance, that should be setting some alarm bells off and going, is that right? Yeah, because an expense account should always have a debit balance. I mean, it can have a credit balance, of course it can, but in the real world, expenses should have a debit balance. Another thing we see is just the missing of a ledger account entirely. Yeah, so entirely missing a ledger account. Yeah, which would probably in most cases cause your trial balance. Certainly, if you just miss one ledger account, your trial balance wouldn't balance. But missing ledger accounts entirely, that's an error we see. And then just people who can't add up. Yeah. So start adding up totals, like either when you're balancing ledger accounts or you're adding up totals within the trial balance, just not adding them up properly. Yeah. So the best way to avoid all these errors is just go slowly through the process. Double check what you're doing. Use a calculator if you need to. Yeah. Some people can do it in their head. Some people need a calculator. We've got a calculator. Everybody's carrying a calculator around in their pocket. Yeah. Use that. Yeah. And then always ensure that every ledger account's been included and that the final totals of debits and credits do match. So with all that said then, why does it even matter? Yeah, you might be wondering why bother going to all this trouble, yeah, if all you're going to do is create a set of financial statements. Well, ultimately, the financial statements you create, so your statement of profit or loss, your statement of financial position, are only as reliable as the data on which they're built. Yeah, and ultimately, they're built from a trial balance. The trial balance gives you confidence that the totals coming from the ledger accounts are correct. Yeah, and of course, it's especially important for AAT assessments, yeah, and practical work in real businesses, because if the trial balance doesn't match, the statement of profit or loss and the statement of financial position will probably be wrong as well. Yeah. Now think of a trial balance as like a gate. Yeah. So if your trial balance doesn't balance, the gate won't open. Yeah. And you can't go through the gate, and you can't go through the gate and do your financial statements. Yeah. If your trial balance does balance, then the gate will open and you can move forward and do your financial statements. So let's just have a quick recap then and a summary of what I've covered in today's session, in today's podcast. So what we've covered then is a trial balance, and the trial balance lists the debits and credit balances from all your ledger accounts. It helps you to check that total debits equal total credits. As I mentioned, it's not an external report, so it's not something that's leaving the business. It's wholly internal, and it's a check. Yeah, it's an internal check of your internal processes. It's not something that should be shared externally. It won't catch every single error, because all it captures is that debits don't equal credits. Now I'm going to put a challenge on the screen in a minute. Yeah. And this is a challenge that I'm going to set you, and we can come back to this at the start of the next podcast episode. So what I want you to do is create a trial balance using the ledger account balances that I'm going to put up on the screen. Yeah. So it's sales revenue, which has a credit balance of £3,000. Inventory, that has a debit balance of £1,000. Rent expense with a debit of £600. Trade payables with a credit balance of £1,100. The bank with a debit balance of £500. And then finally, capital with a credit of £2,000. So what we want to do then is lay them out into two columns, credits and debits, debits and credits, yeah? And then total each side. Do those things match? Yeah. And we'll, like I say, let you have a go at that, and we'll come back to that at the start of the next episode. So that brings me to the end of episode 6 of Debit Credit Done. And today we've looked at the trial balance and why it's such a crucial part of the bookkeeping process. And in the next episode, we're going to move on to something that I find quite exciting, which is a statement of profit or loss. So we're going to see how we can measure profit and loss and what that tells us about how a business is performing. If you found this podcast useful, then I would ask you to follow the podcast, review the podcast, and share it ideally with someone else that's studying AAT. Yeah, or indeed any of the other many multitude of accounting qualifications. And you can also send me feedback via most of the podcast channels, or topic suggestions. And I just really want to thank everyone for listening. Yeah, your support is much appreciated. Remember, when your trial balance adds up, we're ready for what comes next, which is the fun bit. Yeah. Until next time, I'm Dean, and this is Debit Credit Done.